Welcome back to the Convo Couch, my humans. I am Pasta Jardula.
And I'm Fiorella.
And Jonny Sue is still spinning on those ones and twos. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you know us. We like to get the big guest, the good guest, the nuanced guest. We listen to you. A lot of people reached out and said, have this gentleman on our show. So we went out there and got him to bring him home and talk some serious stuff today. I think you're going to like this guest, ladies and gentlemen. He is nuanced, to say the least, and he is got some great, interesting point of views. So today we have a man by the name of Mark Charles. He's a dual citizen of the United States and the Navajo Nation, and he is running as an independent candidate for the president of the United States. Please welcome Mark Charles. How you doing, Mark?
Yate. Well, thank you very much. It's great to be with you.
It's great to have you. So, I watched some of your stuff, and I understand people, they're like, Mark Charles, that doesn't sound like a man from the Navajo. I said, yeah, but Mark Charles is 1/4 from the the wooden shoe people, right?
Yeah, so let me introduce myself if I can. So I'll do it traditionally. So Yate, Mark Charles Unishia, Sinbake Dina Nishla, the Tohiglini Vasichin, Sinbake Dina Dasachedo Toluchini Dasanella. In our Navajo culture, when we introduce ourselves, we always give our 4 clans. We're matrilineal as a people, and our identities come from our mother's mother. So my mother's mother is American of Dutch heritage, and that's why I say Tsinbake Dene. Translated loosely, that means I'm from the wooden shoe people. My second clan, my father's mother, is Tohiglini, which is the waters that flow together. My third clan, my mother's father, is also Tsinbake Dene. And then my fourth clan, my father's father, is Totochitni, and that's the Bitterwater clan. It's one of the original clans of our Navajo people. I also just want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from my home in Washington, D.C., and this is the traditional land of the Piscataway. And I want to honor the Piscataway as the host people of these lands. I want to acknowledge that they are still here, and I am grateful and thankful to them for their stewardship of these lands, these hundreds, even thousands of years. It's my practice to honor the lands of the people I'm on, the people of the land I'm on, no matter where I go around the country. And so I want to make sure I honor the Piscataway people today.
Where could we find out that information? Because you talk about that. It's like important if you go and you find it out, because there's a sense of humbleness with that. Yeah.
One of the resources I use most frequently, especially when I'm traveling to a place I haven't been before, is a website called native-land.ca. And it's not the ultimate authority, but it's a really good authority or resource to begin your research of what lands you're living on anywhere around North America. You can enter in your zip code, your city, your state, and it will give you the treaties signed on that land. It will give you the languages spoken in that area, and it will give you the nation that their researchers have found most likely were from that land before colonization occurred. And so it's a very good resource. It's not, I found it inaccurate a few times, but most of the time it's a great place to begin research. And then of course, I always try to double check with people from the area and then look up the nations that they say are in the area and find out their own histories myself.
I'm going to do that.
So why, let's just get down to the nitty gritty of it. Why should people vote for Mark Charles?
My campaign is really trying to do something that has actually never been done in our nation. There was probably 2016, it was 4 years ago, and President Obama was giving his final State of the Union. And I was listening to his speech, and he was acknowledging the divisiveness that he encountered during his presidency. Even Mitch McConnell referred to himself as the Grim Reaper because his job was to stop almost everything President Obama initiated. And he was acknowledging the divisiveness and calling for our nation to create what he called a new politics. And in his speech, he quoted the Constitution. He said, "We the people." Our Constitution begins with these 3 simple words. Words that we've come to recognize mean all the people. Now, he got a lot of applause for that line. And most people like to believe that what he said is true. But I've researched, I've studied, I've looked at our history as a country. I've learned about the doctrine of discovery. I've looked at the history of the church, and I've realized that we the people has never meant all the people. The founding fathers, many of them who owned enslaved people and committed genocide against Native peoples, did not believe we the people meant all the people. Abraham Lincoln, who was a blatant white supremacist, who literally committed genocide and ethnically cleansed the tribes from Minnesota, Colorado, and the territory of New Mexico to make way for the Transcontinental Railway. He didn't believe we the people meant all the people. As good as our civil rights movement was, it did not get us to a point of we the people meaning all the people. President Trump does not believe we the people meant all the people. So when I heard President Obama say that, I said, that sounds beautiful, but it's not true. And I realized this is the conversation we have to have. We need to stop debating it. We need to stop having this 250-year trajectory of let's get to a place where we're all equal. Let's start taking baby steps. No, we need to basically, when you're in a board, when you serve on a board and you've been debating an issue for a long time, eventually somebody will call the question, right? Which means you kind of clear the queue and let the people say their last words, and then you have a vote. And my campaign is calling the question. Do we want to be a nation where we the people truly means all the people? If we don't, then okay, we're fine. Vote Trump or Biden, doesn't really matter. They're both going to maintain the status quo and not going to get us to that point. Yeah. If we want to be a nation where we the people actually means all the people, then we have to address our foundations. We have a constitution. That Article 1, Section 2 never mentions women, specifically excludes natives, counts Africans as 3/5 of a person. We've never abolished slavery. The 13th Amendment just redefines and codifies it under the jurisdiction of the criminal justice system. Our Declaration of Independence, which begins with these bold words, we hold these truths to be self-evident, all men are created equal, 30 lines later refers to natives as merciless Indian savages. Just 2 weeks ago, in McGirt versus Oklahoma, the United States Supreme Court ruled that any time Congress can muster the will, they can break treaties with native tribes and disestablish reservation lands, and there will be no one holding them accountable. So if we want to live in a nation where we the people means all the people, we have to address our foundations. I wear my hair, my siete, my Navajo bun, tied with red yarn. The reason I wear it with red yarn is to remind myself when I tie my hair in the morning to pray for a crisis in Indian country known as missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Hundreds, thousands of Indigenous women and girls have been reported missing by their families or even murdered. And not only have their cases not been closed, in most instances, they haven't even been opened.
Yeah.
Literally, the families are left to search for them themselves. It's a crisis known as missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. When I was at the Frank LaMere Native American Presidential Forum last August, Bernie Sanders was there, Elizabeth Warren was there, Kamala Harris was there, Julian Castro was there, Marianne Williamson was there. Probably 10 of the top Democrats were at that forum, and I was there as well. And they asked these candidates about this crisis. And most of the candidates said something to the effect, once they learned about it, that they would enact a new law or they would create a new policy to deal with this very vulnerable demographic to protect them. While what I tell people is when your Declaration of Independence calls natives savages and your Constitution never mentions women, you probably shouldn't be surprised when your Indigenous women go missing or get murdered and society doesn't care. A new law isn't going to fix this problem. This is a foundational level issue. We want to deal with this issue. We have to change our foundations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is what my campaign is about, is calling the question and saying we have to wrestle with the foundations that we're standing on, the basis for our laws, so that we can actually be a nation where we, the people, for the first time in our history, actually includes everybody.
Let's talk a little bit about the doctrine of discovery, because that's a big a big foundation of what you're running on. You talk about it often, and it really is, when people discover, they just realize it can be eye-opening. I remember you giving that speech and then talking about it after, saying, all right, guys, ladies and gentlemen, you've been hit with all this information. I know it might be overwhelming. And I think the thing that is really overwhelming is that doctrine of discovery. When people think of that and they go, wow. Can you give us a little synopsis about what the doctrine of discovery is?
Yeah, the doctrine of discovery, and first I want to acknowledge there are many people within our Native communities who've done a tremendous job of bringing this to the forefront. Stephen Newcomb has written a great book titled Pagans in the Promised Land. At the Frank LaMere Native American Forum, there was a wonderful woman. She's now 100 years old. She's a World War II Army veteran. She was a nurse in World War II. And she was asking candidates about the doctrine of discovery. I myself have written a book on it titled Unsettling Truth, the Ongoing Dehumanizing Legacy of the Doctrine of Discovery. My co-author, Sing-Chan Ra, and I published that book about 6 or 7 months ago. But the Doctrine of Discovery, it's a series of papal bulls, edicts of the Catholic Church, written between 1452 and 1493. It's essentially the church in Europe saying to the nations of Europe, wherever you go, whatever lands you find not ruled by white European Christian rulers, those people are less than human and their land is yours to take. This is literally the doctrine that let European nations colonize Africa and enslave the people. They didn't believe them to be human. It's the same doctrine that let Columbus, who was, if you're honest, lost at sea, land in this new world, which was already inhabited by millions, and claim to have discovered it. As we state in the first chapter of our book, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. You can steal those lands, you can conquer those lands, you can colonize those lands. You can't discover them unless you do not believe the people there to be human. And so this reveals the implicit racial bias of our nation, because we have monuments, we have proclamations, we have history books identifying Columbus as the discoverer of America. This reveals our bias, which is that Native people specifically, and people of color in general, are not human.
Yeah. How does it tie into Ruth Bader Ginsburg?
I'm sorry?
Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Yeah, so in 1823, John Marshall the Supreme Court is presiding over a case called Johnson versus McIntosh. It's two men of European descent litigating over a single piece of land. One of them acquired the land from a native tribe. The other one acquired the same piece of land, they said, from the government, and they want to know who owned it. Who had the right to sell the land, the tribe or the government? The case went all the way to the Supreme Court. John Marshall's court had to decide the principle for land titles. They ruled that discovery is what gave title to the land. And then they referenced this doctrine of discovery and declared essentially that because natives are savages, we only are occupants of the land, while Europeans, who are more fully human, have the right of discovery, the fee title to the land, so they're the true title holders. That case, along with a few others in the 1820s and 30s, create the legal precedent for land titles. That precedent gets referenced by the Supreme Court in 1954, 1985, and in an opinion written by Ruth Bader Ginsburg in 2005 regarding land titles for the Oneida Indian Nation in the state of New York, references in the first footnote of the case by name the doctrine of discovery, and essentially comes to the same conclusion that John Marshall did back in 1823, which is because natives are savages, they're only occupants of the land, and this land has been converted from wilderness to become parts of city like Sherrill, and therefore the Oneida Indian Nation cannot rekindle embers of sovereignty that long ago grew cold. It didn't use the word savages, but it made the exact same argument that John Marshall made back in 1823, where he did use the word savages. And so this is the challenge, which is because land titles, the land your house resides on, sets on, that title is based on this doctrine of discovery, which is rooted in the lie of white supremacy and the belief that natives are savages and therefore don't have title to the land. And so this, when push comes to shove, makes white supremacy a bipartisan value and helps us understand why even Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right, who's the progressive voice of dissent on a more further and further right-leaning court,
yeah,
and even she didn't just vote in this way or didn't just rule in this way. She wrote the opinion arguing these things. This is the challenge. I actually have a TED talk out about that. It's called We the People, the 3 most misunderstood words in U.S. history. It's a TEDx talk. I did it about late 2018. It's online. You can Google it. Just Google Mark Charles, We the People. It's an 18-minute TED talk going in depth into that Supreme Court case and helping people understand how it's being referenced even as recently as 2005.
Yeah.
Johnny, did you want to ask that? Okay. Well, you have an understanding, obviously, of Americans' imperialism, as you mentioned, and how their policies. How are you going to take that into account if you were to be president? Because a lot of people, what we find, is that's where they're lacking the most: understanding America's exceptionalism, understanding their imperialism, understanding the foreign policy and how we vilify a multitude of other countries. Are we going to be ending the CIA? Are we going to have a peace department? What are your thoughts on the military-industrial complex?
Yeah, I mean, all of these are really good questions. And, you know, the challenge we're facing as Americans, and one of the things I talk about frequently in my books, my lectures, and in my campaign, is that we don't even understand our own history. In fact, in my campaign announcement video on our website at markcharles2020.com, I framed my campaign, and this was in May of 2019, and I said I'm embarking on an 18-month journey to help our nation understand American history. One of the things that I continually confront is this myth of American exceptionalism, this myth that because we are some God-blessed nation and we have a land covenant with God of Abraham and the right of manifest destiny over these lands, that we have some special relationship with God, and that excuses our genocide. And so because of this buried history that our nation literally does not know what to do with or how to discuss it, and because of the fact that we've never lost a war that matters, right? Who writes the history books? Well, the victors do. We have not lost a war that matters in 250, almost 400 years, right? We've never lost land. We've never had a military overthrown. We've never had to demilitarize. We've never had to had a regime change. We've won basically every war we've ever fought in. Even the fact that most Americans aren't even aware that today is the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima, where we literally dropped a nuclear bomb on a urban center, killing tens of thousands of people in an instant. And yet somehow our history books frame that as a positive thing, right?
Save lives, right?
Why? Because we won the war.
Yeah.
So we get to write the history about it. I promise you, Japan is not celebrating American exceptionalism today, right? As they honor the tens of thousands of people who were civilians, women and children, who were killed in an instant. And Hiroshima actually wasn't even the worst bombing raid we did in Japan, nor was Nagasaki. It was actually, the bombing of Tokyo, Operation Meeting House. That was the most deadly bombing we did in Japan. It killed more than Hiroshima or Nagasaki individually. It killed over 100,000 people in that single bombing raid. We killed over 300,000 civilians. In fact, Robert McNamara, in his video, The Fog of War, and he was working in the Pacific Theater during World War II for General LeMay, who was a general over these bombing raids. And McNamara was working as an analyst, and he was basically helping General LeMay decide how to bomb and what the best way to bomb and set strategy for that through the analysis he was doing of our bombing raids. And he said, LeMay came up to them at one point and said, you know, if we lose the war, we will be tried as war criminals. And McNamara agreed in his documentary, The Fog of War. He said, and he was right. We were behaving as war criminals. The only reason why he died a hero instead of a convicted war criminal is not because his actions were any more just or any different. It's because we won the war. That's the only difference. And so this is the history our nation doesn't know what to do with. We don't know what to do with the fact that at the battle of the massacre at Wounded Knee, not only were 300 to 350 Dakota people slaughtered in a single day, but we gave 20 medals of honor to the soldiers who participated in that massacre.
Yeah.
We don't know what to do with that. And so this is the challenge. And one of the things that I would do as president of the United States, one of the things I talk about our campaign, one of my goals is to create what is called common memory. There's a great quote by I forget his name right now. There's a quote that says, "Where common memory is lacking." George Erasmus, who is a Dene leader a native leader from the Dene people up in Canada. He says, where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same path, there can be no real community. If you want to build community, you have to start by creating common memory.
Yeah.
This, I think, gets to the heart of our nation's problem with race, which is we do not have a common memory. We have a white majority that remembers the mythological history of discovery and expansion, opportunity and exceptionalism. And we have people of color, Native peoples, African Americans, who have the lived history of slavery, of broken treaties, of stolen lands, of massacres, of internment camps, of segregation, of Jim Crow laws, of families being ripped apart at our borders. And there's no common memory. And we have the same problem internationally. Some of our closest allies are colonial nations: France, Germany, Great Britain. These are nations that literally colonized huge portions of the world during the 18th and 19th and even early 20th centuries.
Yeah.
And they're our closest allies. And so not only do we have to deal with this lack of a common memory domestically, we have to deal with it internationally. And we need to understand that some of the countries we're the closest with are actually all colonial nations that have never dealt with their colonial past. One of the appointments or the nominations I look most forward to making as president is I want to nominate a Native American as my Secretary of State. I would love the experience of not only having our nation being led by an Indigenous man, but having our primary ambassador to the world be someone who is also Indigenous. So we can actually have honest dialogue with not only our allies, but with many other nations around the world, dealing with our colonial past and history and what has been wreaked upon these communities all around the globe. And what do we need to do to address those and try and fix those relationships?
It's funny because I'm glad you mentioned common memory, because I wanted to understand why it's so important to talk about the past to build a better future, and you kind of hit on that. But I also want to go a little bit deeper, Charles, because sometimes you talk about white America. Aren't you a little concerned, though, sometimes that when you do talk about white America, that it might turn some people off because they feel that they're not a monolith and that everyone's life experience is different, essentially making every person's perspective on race a little bit different?
That is one of the challenges, yes. One of the reasons that challenge exists is because Western culture is highly and incredibly individualistic.
Yes.
And so white Americans especially see the world almost entirely through an individual lens. And while I do not deny there's a strong sense of individuality and our own complicity and responsibility of how we live and what we're involved in, what we're not, we also have to know that people are communal. And we have institutions, we have corporations, we have communities, and communities also bear responsibility. And so when I talk about white America, when I talk about white people, I'm not talking about individuals. I'm talking about this group, this identity known as whiteness. And whiteness is not a static thing. You know, what was defined as white in 1776 and what's defined as white in 2020 are two very different definitions. In 1776, it might have been white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, where, you know, when the Irish first came here, they weren't considered white. When other smaller groups of Europeans came here, they weren't considered white. But now they very much would be considered white and would pass and would be treated differently because of the color of their skin or the hue of their skin. And so whiteness has been a much more fluid understanding and identity. But to only view whiteness and to only view racial oppression through the lens of individuals does not account for the deep ways that whiteness and white supremacy has been both institutionalized and written even into our very foundations and into our Constitution and our other founding documents. And that's what we have to deal with. So one of the things I talk about frequently in my campaign is I am trying to decenter whiteness, right? I'm not trying to oppress white people. I'm not trying to just give them a taste of their own medicine, but I'm trying to decenter them. When throughout our entire history as a nation, white people have been at the center, right? When you look at our founding documents, the Constitution, which starts with the words, "We the people." Article 1, Section 2, just a few lines later, it's the section that determines who is and who is not a part of the country, who is and who is not covered by the Constitution. When you read Article 1, Section 2, you will note it never mentions women. Now that's important because if you read the entire document, you will find that there are 51 gender-specific male pronouns, he, him, and his, who's protected by the Constitution, who's included, even who gets to run for office. 51 gender-specific male pronouns. There's not a single female pronoun in the entire document. So Article 1, Section 2 doesn't mention women. It specifically excludes natives, and it counts Africans as 3/5 of a person. So in 1776, who does that leave? Well, it technically leaves white men, right? That's almost all you have left. And technically, it was white landowning men who could vote.
Yes.
So when our founding fathers wrote the words, "We the people," people literally meant white landowning men. Now, once we acknowledge that, suddenly our world makes a whole lot more sense. Why do women earn 50 to 70 cents to the dollar? Oh, our Constitution's working. Why is our prisons filled with people of color? Oh, our Constitution's working. Why in 2010 did the Supreme Court side with Citizens United and rule that corporations now have the same rights to political free speech as individuals, opening the door for super PACs and their unlimited support for candidates? Oh, it's because our Constitution's working. It's protecting the interests of white landowning men. So we need to decenter that. Again, I'm not saying let's oppress white people, although it will feel oppressive when you're used to being treated as superior in almost every instance to suddenly be treated just as average. That will feel oppressive, even though it's not, right? Yeah. It's just, and so that's what we're trying to do with our campaign. And that's what I realized the only way I'm going to get elected, because presidential campaigns and elections literally are run through white landowning communities like Iowa and New Hampshire.
Right.
I have to get elected not by gaining the vote of white landowning men, but in spite of the opposition of white landowning men. So my entire strategy doesn't even depend on the support, the money, or even necessarily the votes of white landowning men. I've actually found a way that can potentially get us to the White House without having to tailor my message to the people who are so most used to being centered. And I can actually decenter them through my campaign.
So you're calling for a national discussion on race, which is obviously needed. I mean, we're seeing what's happening out there regarding police brutality, regarding Black lives, regarding the missing Indigenous women. Is that as important as implementing policy? Can you do both? Because a lot of people seem to think that when you talk about race and you elevate racial issues, we are inciting a division between people based on race, and they feel like that it's not inclusive when it doesn't necessarily touch on economics. So yeah, what like how do we get those people who aren't necessarily like kind of what he said, they're not necessarily comfortable with that? If you're going to avoid them, if you're going to decentralize them, how do you plan on implementing the policy?
So I just actually addressed this on a live stream on my campaign YouTube channel today, where one of the challenges we face, right, because our nation was written, our founding documents were written to be governed by white landowning men, right? Our founders never envisioned that women would ever be in office, that people of color would ever be sitting in the Senate chamber. That was never even a thought in their mind. And so our systems were set up to centralize or center the voice of white men. And over the past 4 or 5 decades, as more women have been elected to those offices, as more people of color have gone into those offices, our nation has lost the ability to have political discourse, right? Because we actually now have these marginalized people sitting at the table in these chambers that were never designed or meant to include them. And so what's happened now, like with our policy debate, is it's not even a debate anymore. It's a bingo game card, or it's a checklist. And so you lay out, this are my policies, A, B, C, D, and E. Bernie Sanders is Medicare for all. Andrew Yang was universal basic income. Donald Trump is Make America Great Again and Build a Wall. We lay out our policies, and then you go up and you check them. Okay, they check, and whoever gets the most check on your card, they win the bingo tournament for your vote. And that's who you vote for. And there's no discourse. I mean, this is very evident today, right? Where we are so unable to have political discourse that we are in the midst of the greatest economic and health crisis our nation, the world, has seen in probably a century, correct? Mm-hmm. And our Congress members cannot even decide, do they want to provide unemployment benefits to the 14 plus million people who've lost their job. This is how broken our system is. We can't even decide this in the greatest economic downturn since the Great Depression. We've lost that much ability to actually have discourse. And so one of the things I've realized is the challenge we're facing with policy is it's merely a shopping list, and it's not about actually having conversation and discussion. And so let's just take Bernie Sanders' issue of Medicare for all as an example, right? If I, as a candidate, came out tomorrow and said, I am advocating for Medicare for all, I could probably win a large number of Bernie Sanders supporters. But I would also gain as many detractors, if not more, from not only the Democratic Party, but the Republican Party, who are saying, I'm never going to have that discussion, or we're never going to go there. Like that's a non-starter for us. That's dead on arrival. And so while you might be able to get enough votes to get into office, you lose your ability to govern. And even if we look at Bernie Sanders' issue of Medicare for all, now Bernie Sanders does a great job of bringing the issue of economic inequality to the forefront, but he really doesn't understand race. And so because we have these foundations that marginalize women, marginalize people of color, that are centered around white landowning men, if somehow Bernie Sanders stayed in the race and got nominated and got elected and was somehow able to drive Medicare for all down the throats of the Republicans and actually get it passed, right? What we would have is we would have a system that would provide great health care for white men and a hodgepodge for everybody else. That would really be dependent on who was in office. Could you imagine what would happen for women's health care, especially women's reproductive care, in a Republican-run administration? How would Medicare for all serve those women? Well, it probably wouldn't. And so this is the challenge of, because we don't have foundations that distribute things evenly, when we try to create policy to include people without dealing with the foundations, we end up getting a hodgepodge of what gets actually distributed. Not that Medicare for all is a bad idea. I mean, I actually think I would agree with Bernie Sanders in that healthcare is a right, not a privilege. But if we don't deal with our foundations first, we're never going to find a way to distribute it equitably or equally around our nation.
But don't you think that, Mark? I just want to just put Bernie Sanders real quick, and I don't mean to step on your toes, because I supported Tulsi Gabbard, but I think Bernie Sanders was one of those politicians that was open to listening and learning about race. I mean, I thought he was exceptionally great of stepping back and listening, and I would think for sure that he would listen to voices like yourself and get that Medicare for all where we need to go for everybody, including women.
He was better than almost every other politician at listening to issues of race. But I do not believe he understood race. I don't think he understood how damaging it really was. And I don't think he was, I think he saw it as more of a stumbling block along the way than a foundational level issue that had to be dealt with first. And so I would agree that he was, I mean, one of the reasons in 2016, one of the reasons I actually started paying attention to him was he was one of the first candidates to actually begin campaigning to Native nations, and he was actually well received both in 2016 and in 2020 by Native nations, by Native peoples, because he actually came and spoke to us and he listened to us. So I will agree he did a good job of listening, but that doesn't mean he understood the issue. And there's a big difference between being willing to listen to the issue and being able to lead on the issue because you actually understand it. Right. And that's where I'm saying I think he fell short, is he doesn't understand the issue, which makes it almost impossible to lead on the issue.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of goes along with the class versus race thing that we're all talking about here, because some people like Bernie Sanders initially was in 2016, he was able to get a lot of Republican support and a lot of support in the South and the Midwest because he was focused primarily on economic policy. And we know that a lot of Republican conservative people pay a lot of attention to the economics of things. So he was able to frame things like Medicare for all and socialist ideas in a way that affected their pockets directly. And that's why he got a lot of independent support, a lot of people that then went on, when he lost the primary to Hillary Clinton, to vote for Donald Trump. And that's a very interesting thing. It is a class issue, yeah. I would say, between like somebody who focuses more on economics and somebody who focuses more on race. And I don't think he'd be able to understand in any way, because he is a white man. He is Jewish, but I mean, he is ultimately a white man. So to him, he got criticized a lot by some of the black community, but some of that were definitely a lot of smears, and some of it was legitimate. Some of it was definitely legitimate.
And Mark, I just want to, piggyback on the fact of what she's saying, that, with the creation of computers, that life has changed so much in the past, the interactions, like the individualities in the past decades. And more people seem to be influenced by like social media, where they've never read the Constitution that you're talking about, whatnot. You know what I'm saying?
Insane.
So it's like, I think that, social media has a different effect. And I think he was trying to maneuver the political landscape. Once again, when it comes to Native American issues, only Tulsi Gabbard showed up at Stand and Rack, and only Bernie was the other one to really talk to Native Americans. I really think that everybody else stayed away from this. But don't you think there is some type of challenge when you kind of navigate through this landscape where it's just a different world and social media has so much of an effect rather than the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, which you constantly refer to?
I would say, just because people don't understand the effect it has, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It has a huge impact on the way we live our lives. Like I described with the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, this is absolutely a foundational level issue. And so, and that's actually one of the challenges, is because people don't know what the Constitution says, because they don't know, like on my website, one of my 100-day plan for my campaign is, in the first 100 days, I want to remove the racism, the sexism, and the white supremacy from our Constitution. On our website, on our blog, I actually have an edited version of the Constitution, where I used a strike-through font, and I removed the racist, the sexist, and the white supremacist language. Every place it said he, him, or his, I changed it to a gender-neutral pronoun or a proper noun. The Three-Fifths Compromise in Article 1, Section 2, I put a strike-through font through it. The clause in the 13th Amendment, keeping slavery legal in prison, I put a strike-through font through it. I encourage people who think the Constitution was written to include everybody, I say, get on a Zoom call and read it out loud, especially in front of natives, African Americans, and women. You will quickly, with a blushing face, realize how exclusive this document actually is. I mean, the words are shocking when you actually read them. And once we acknowledge, this is what it says, and then we look at the world we're living in, it's like, this makes sense now. And so that's the thing I'm trying to really wake people up to is we have to understand how deeply our lives and our policies and our laws are shaped by this document. You know, I mean, it was just last year, literally, that Virginia finally ratified the ERA, and it didn't get passed. And they were the last state needed for the 2/3 of the states, but it didn't, because it had the grandfather clause on it had passed, or the expiration date on it had passed. It actually didn't become law. It didn't become an amendment. So it's 2019, 2020, and we still can't decide that we want to be a nation where the rights of women are constitutionally protected. Yeah. And so this is where I encourage people, and I actually encourage people to go onto our website and read my version of the Constitution. I'm not changing checks and balances. I'm not changing balance of power. In fact, I'm making the document say what most people believe it says anyway. Yeah. And they're very minor changes. They're changes to wording and removing of racist and sexist statements. And I think it's a great way for our people to understand, our citizens to understand, this is how deeply we're affected by this document.
But don't you feel there'll be like a civil war before they allow, because there's a lot of people here in America that don't understand how inherently racist they are. They don't think they are, but they are opposed to changing anything regarding the Constitution. Like you touch anything on the Constitution and they'll freak out. I mean, I feel like we're on the brink of a possible war, like a civil war again, because before what you say, before we even touch that document, people are really going to get out there and oppose it. I mean, I think we'll definitely have other people that are willing, the younger generation's willing to stand with you and fight for editing this Constitution, which, by the way, the vast majority of countries all over the world have had multiple constitutions. We are the only country that has refused to change anything besides amendments. And so at this point, do you not think that would incite a sort of civil war to attempt to change this sacred document?
Well, again, most change, right, comes through crisis. I mean, that's what happens frequently in most places around the country, around the world. My whole goal of what I'm trying to do is to actually invoke this change without crisis. This is why I'm teaching the history I'm teaching. This is why I've written the book I'm written. And this is why I'm running for president, is because I want to actually have the debate. I want our nation, I want to call the question, do we want to be a nation where we the people mean to everybody? If we don't, then okay, we're doing a great job. If we do, then we have to change our foundations. I'm not trying to drive this change down the throat of our country, but I truly do believe, not only among millennials and Gen Z, but I think there is a large number of Americans who would like to live in a nation where we the people includes everybody. Yeah. And that's what my campaign is based on. That hope is that we actually have enough people in our country, and they may not be able to articulate it now, they may not have been able to say it yesterday, but they can read what our Constitution says, they can hear the arguments my campaign is making, and they can come and say, that makes sense, and I want to be a part of that, right? Because that's attractive. What we have right now is not attractive. This is why so many Americans are fed up with politics. Yep. Right? When we have a Congress that can't even decide in a pandemic with 14 million people unemployed that we want to provide unemployment benefits to people. People are sick of that. And so I'm trying to tap into that desire to understand humanity and that desire to feel included. And to say, yeah, and the whole vision of a common memory, we can have a better community by creating this common memory. And so what I'm calling for is this national dialogue on race, gender, and class. And I want to use that dialogue to bring our nation into this space where we can actually deal with our past and find a good way to move forward.
Can you specify how you are planning on tackling class in all of this? Where does the class ideology fall, because right now we're on the brink of economic collapse. We're seeing, like you mentioned, people not even being able to get the extension of the unemployment benefits. We're seeing people getting scared of getting evicted soon. The eviction moratoriums will stop. And lots of homeless people everywhere. Businesses are never going to come back. How is class addressed in your platform?
Yeah, first of all, I absolutely believe in a livable wage. We need people to be able to earn money that actually they can live on. 6 months ago, President Trump was bragging that he had built the greatest economy our nation's ever seen, right? We had 11 years of a bull market. We had corporate profits going through the roof. We had historically low unemployment. By several measures, yes, we had a very good economy, but that took 5 days to come crumbling down, right? You'd think if we had such a great economy, it could handle the pandemic for at least a few months. It took 5 days for that thing to come crashing down. And now we have literally been spending trillions of dollars to prop it back up again. So this whole issue that's before the Senate right now, we're talking about the $600 of unemployment benefits. Now, most states pay, on average, between $250 and $300 in unemployment benefits, and the $600 is going on top of that. So that's about $900 a week, which works out to between $18 and $22 an hour, which is almost a livable wage, right? You almost can pay your rent on that, buy your groceries on that, pay your bills on that, and maybe even do something special once a month or something like that. Like, that's almost a livable wage.
Yeah.
And so right now we have people who were working for minimum wage, which was anywhere between $9 and $12 an hour, maybe as high as 15 in a few places, and which is not livable. And then they lost their job, and out of necessity, gave them a livable amount of money. And now the Republicans are afraid of, now they're not going back to work because because they can make more money, like they're going to get rich. Like, I challenge Mitch McConnell. I promise you offer him a job for $900 a week, he's going to turn his face at you and act insulted. He would never consider working a job for $900 a week. That would be an insulting low amount of money for him. But all this is a livable wage for a few people. And so now, in the midst of this pandemic, we're asking them to give up a livable amount of money to go back to frontline work in the midst of a pandemic, literally to risk their life for money that doesn't even pay their bills. This is a symbol of how broken our system is. Bernie Sanders, others will talk about how America is the richest country in the world. The only way we are the richest country in the world is if you have a very colonial understanding of wealth. Yes, we have a ton of billionaires, and we have a lot of members of the upper echelons of the 1%, but we have one of the greatest economic disparities of any nation in the world. I think we're second, next to Chile. And so we have to address these things. We have to be able to pay a livable wage. We need an economy. One of the challenges we have with a lot of the Democratic policies right now is they are funding their social programs by taxing the 1% and taxing billionaires, right? Well, when you have social programs being funded by the tax on billionaires, guess what? You need an economy that continues to produce billionaires. One of the things I want to have a debate on is, can you ethically and morally be a billionaire?
Nope.
Is that even possible?
Nope.
I don't think it is. I think rather than having social programs based on the tax rate of billionaires, we should have an economy that doesn't produce billionaires.
Yeah.
I think we should have a better distribution and a different way of how we even incorporate companies, and what are the protections and protections we give to corporations. We have people like Donald Trump, who literally starts corporations, drives them into the ground, leaves hundreds of people unemployed with no wages, and they walk away making millions of dollars. How is that helpful in an economic environment?
Yeah.
I think we have to have a very robust debate on what kind of protections do we give to corporations and to corporate executives. You know, when right now we have these corporations that are literally going bankrupt, and they're paying their executives 6 to 7 figure salaries so they can retain them so they're laying off hundreds of people. Meanwhile, they're paying their executives 6 to 7 figures so they can retain them through this crisis. I think we need to find some way that, yeah, maybe you're not going to go penniless, but if you are a corporate executive who has literally made millions of dollars off of a corporation, before the corporation can go bankrupt, it has to actually claw back some of that money from its executives. Yeah. Not money they maybe brought into the job, but definitely money they've enriched themselves with since they've had the job.
Yeah.
So that they actually have some stake in whether or not the company succeeds or fails. These are the types of discussions we need to have, and you know, we just need to acknowledge. Right now, there's all this talk about we need to rebuild our economy, or we need to get back to where we were 6 months ago. Well, 6 months ago, we had an economy that was not working for most Americans. Right. Those who were employed were working gig jobs, 2 or 3 jobs a day. You know, they couldn't pay their health insurance. They could barely pay their rent. This economy was not working before the pandemic, and now we're spending trillions of dollars to prop it up. And we have to actually, while it's down, we need to fix it.
Yeah. 33 million people in poverty, like another 23 million near poverty, 600,000 people homeless on the streets. It was ridiculous to think that to get back to where we were, even for when Obama was in office, when people say, oh, well, we got to get back to just the Obama days. I'm like, it wasn't the glorious days back then either. And I just want to mention, somebody here put a super chat and it says, thank you so much for having on Mark Charles. We cannot tear it all down and build it up if we are not prepared to deal with the faulty foundation. He is spot on with his message, and I think that's great. And, you know, I said before we had Mark Charles on, we can talk to Mark Charles for hours and hours and hours. He is amazing. But we want to talk about the state of your presidency. But before we do, I know our audience, wants to hear a little bit about the way you geopolitically connect Israel and the United States. Can you give us a little sample of that?
Yeah. So I'll try not to go too in depth in this. I actually cover this a lot in my books, and I cover this a lot on lectures I give on the Doctrine of Discovery online. But when you look closely at the Doctrine of Discovery and how it's influenced the theology of our nation, and I tell Americans of all religious persuasions, if you do not understand the history of the Christian church, you will never understand the history of our nation. The two are so intertwined, tightly tied, that you cannot untie them. And so one of the ways that our history intertwined with our religion is through our notion of manifest destiny. And this belief that we are not only a nation chosen by God, but we have a God-given right to rule these lands from sea to shining sea. This goes all the way back to the sermon given in the Boston Harbor about a city on a hill and all this sort of stuff. Anyway, this theology of promised lands, this understanding that we are a nation chosen by God and we have a manifest destiny, is deeply embedded into the American ethos and the way that we think and imagine and understand ourselves. It's rooted in what I would call this mythology of American exceptionalism, which is based on this lie of white supremacy. And that theology, this notion of promised lands, comes from the Old Testament, where in the Old Testament, when God brought the Jewish people into their promised land, there were Canaanites living there, right? And they had to claim their promised lands. And the way they were told to do that was to literally commit genocide. There are several passages in Deuteronomy and Joshua where God literally says, leave no man, no woman, no child, no animal left alive. Completely kill everybody. So this notion of promised lands brings with it this excuse or this justification for committing genocide. And so when our nation claims this manifest destiny and then enacts it, one of the things when you look at Abraham Lincoln, right, I said he was one of the most genocidal presidents in the history of our country. In 1862, he signed the Pacific Railway Act. This was the act that literally provided the land and the resources to complete manifest destiny. The Transcontinental Railway had made it up to Omaha, Nebraska, and this provided the land and the resources to get all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Now, if you look at, there were three primary routes of the Transcontinental Railway. One went from Omaha, Nebraska towards San Francisco. Another started in Duluth, Minnesota, and went over to Seattle, Washington. And a third went through the southern part of the country, and it went through the territory of New Mexico, Arizona, and comes out near Los Angeles, California. Within 2.5 years of signing that bill, after things like the hanging of the Dakota 38 and the removal of the Dakota War of 1862, after things like the Sand Creek Massacre with the Cheyenne and Arapaho in Colorado, and after the Long Walk and the ethnic cleansing of the Navajo and the Mescalero Apache from the territory of New Mexico, Abraham Lincoln had literally ethnically cleansed the states of Minnesota, Colorado, and the territory of New Mexico from Native nations, making way for the Transcontinental Railway, making him one of the most genocidal presidents in the history of our country. And so when we have this notion of manifest destiny, and we take our greatest president, Abraham Lincoln, who was a blatant white supremacist and literally committed genocide, and we hold him up as our greatest president, this helps us understand how deeply we've embraced this theology of promised land, where we don't even see him as a murderer. And so how this ties in with Israel is we have a very, I would say, a very dysfunctional, codependent relationship with the modern nation state of Israel. Right? So a few years ago, Benjamin Netanyahu came to the U.S. and he was here to lobby against the nuclear deal that President Obama was negotiating with Iran. And he spoke to a joint session of Congress. Now, Congress back then was just as divided as Congress is today. We had a black president, and it was very divided. Several Congress members skipped his speech, and he was talking. He knew he was talking to a very divided Congress, and he had to get everyone on the same page behind him. So early in his speech, he chose one of the most unifying themes in American politics, which is the theme of American exceptionalism. Again, which is based on the lie of white supremacy and rooted in this notion of manifest destiny. And in his speech, he said to our Congress, because the United States and Israel, we share a common destiny, the destiny of promised lands. There's this codependent, dysfunctional relationship that exists between the U.S. and Israel, the modern nation state of Israel, which is based on this theology of promised lands. We need Israel's Old Testament legacy of promised lands to justify what we did to Native peoples and to African people. And the modern nation state of Israel needs our flourishing as a nation with a manifest destiny to justify what they're doing to Palestinians and Bedouins. Mm-hmm. It's a dysfunctional, codependent relationship that's rooted in this theology of promised lands, which basically is about justifying oppression, and in our case, even genocide. And so most Americans don't understand that. They don't understand how dysfunctional this relationship is. They don't understand how much they are actually dependent for the lands they live on to have this notion of promised land as a part of their national theology. And so this is the challenge we're facing as a nation, is we don't know what to do with that. We don't know how to talk about that. And we see it most clearly in our relationship with the modern nation state of Israel.
Amazing. Let's get into your presidency.
Okay, so regarding the presidency, what states do you have ballot access to, and what's the plan to get more access to other states?
So this week, we got notification that we are officially on the ballot in the state of Vermont. We actually filed our paperwork to get on the ballot in the state of Colorado. So we are waiting to hear confirmation back, but we expect that we'll be on the ballot in Colorado. We overall expect that we'll be on the ballot in 3 to 5 states around the country. And we expect that we will be a write-in candidate in 36 to 38 states. We are anticipating that in 41 states throughout the country, people will be able to vote for us. Running as an independent makes it very challenging to get on the ballot. We have a 2-party system designed to marginalize people who aren't within those parties. And there's a pretty high threshold of signatures that are required. Once the pandemic hit and we shut down our public campaigning in early March, we decided we weren't going to do any in-person signature collection. There were a few states that modified their signature collections. They either reduced the numbers of signatures, or like Vermont, they removed them completely. And there's others that allowed us to collect signatures remotely. This hopefully will get on the ballot in 3 to 5 states that way. And then all the rest, we've been signing up. We're filing paperwork to be on the ballot or to be a write-in candidate. In all these states, we need electors. So again, the way the president's actually elected is not through the popular vote, it's through the Electoral College. And so every state has electors that vote in the Electoral College, and each candidate needs their own identified electors. And most of the time, they just need to be registered voters. Sometimes they have to be with a specific party and live in a certain county. But every state needs electors. And so every place that we are working to get on as a write-in candidate, we're working to also get electors. So in Texas, we're trying to get, I think it's 38 electors right now, or 36 electors, so we can file to be a write-in candidate in Texas. We're doing the same thing in Utah. We're doing the same thing in, there's several states that we're working right now to get signed up as a write-in candidate. But we expect that in 41 states around the country, people will be able to vote for me. And that gives us access to about 450 votes in the Electoral College, which is more than the 270 we need to win the presidency. And so our campaign is very much alive. And, you know, I've pointed out to our supporters yesterday that the mainstream media isn't covering us. We're not getting a lot of publicity from the 2-party system or even acknowledgement from the 2 parties. But any real change always comes from the margins.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and we're trying to change things. We're trying to build a nation where for the very first time, we the people means all the people. I'm the only candidate that is advocating for the abolishment of slavery and the honoring of treaties. And so this sort of systemic change is only going to happen from the margins. And so people should not be surprised that to get this change, they're actually going to have to write a name in instead of check it off in a box.
How are
Our
you
system
looking at
doesn't
California?
want that kind of change. California, we are working to get electors there. We expect we'll be able to do it. We need 55 electors. They're the largest state. So we need 55 electors in the state of California. Anyone can go onto our website at markcharles2020.com and click on our ballot access page. On the front page of that section of our website, there's a form that you can fill out and give us your information if you're interested in being an elector. If you want to click on your state, we have all 50 states listed there. And in each of those pages, we have the most up-to-date information our campaign has on ballot access within that state. Are we going to be a write-in in that state? Are we going to be on the ballot in that state? Do we need signatures? Do we need electors? What are our needs for that state? There's about 10 states we will not be able to vote for us in at all, and those states are also identified on that page on our website. That's markcharles2020.com. Ballot access is the section.
All right. I'm assuming that you're not accepting any PAC money, right? So where do you get your money from?
We have not been offered any PAC money. So,
I was going to say that.
Yeah. So our campaign is one of the largest or one of the top independent campaigns. Now, you probably just heard yesterday that both the Democrats and Republicans have been raising hundreds of millions of dollars a month. I think Joe Biden just committed a $280 ad buy for September and October for his campaign. Trump's committed to about $150 million. We've raised about $100 and maybe $10,000 in our campaign, which for an independent is very good. In terms of presidential politics, it's a drop in the bucket. Yeah. But our whole strategy, one of the reasons I'm running in 2020, one of the reasons I'm doing it now is because we have an opportunity. We live in a time and in an era where you can have a national, even a global audience for the price of a library card and some of your privacy. Like if there's ever any time in world history when you could run a campaign and reach potentially millions of voters for little or no money, it's right now. And we are actually, this entire campaign is, for all candidates, is mostly virtual because of the pandemic. And so that levels the playing field to a huge extent for our campaign. I would never wish this crisis on any group of people at any point in any time in history. But the fact that it's happening now and is forcing candidates to campaign online has definitely leveled the playing field for our campaign in some ways that millions of dollars would not even be able to level the playing field to that extent. And so we are taking advantage of the fact that this is a 100% online virtual campaign. We are reaching out on social media. We are reaching out on YouTube and doing live streams several times a week. We have not yet kind of broken over into the national dialogue yet, but there's a lot of people. Our social media is going very, very busy these past few months. We're gaining a lot of interaction, a lot of people looking at our campaign. And when you have, right now we have two white landowning men from the 1%, one who is probably the most divisive candidate we've seen in a long time, and the other who's probably one of the least inspiring candidates we've seen in a long time. And then we have our campaign. And I get emails, sometimes almost daily, from people who say, I just saw your campaign video, the one I released 14 months ago. And they'll say, I just watched it and I'm writing this email to you in tears because I've never felt this kind of hope for our political system before. And when you look at our message, and that campaign video is one of the best tools we have to date for our campaign, where I will regularly share it with people online, even just direct messages or tweeting it to people. And, people say, well, this Mark Charles is never going to win. And I say, well, before you brush me off, watch my video. That's all I ask. Just 9 minutes, watch this video, and then come back and tell me what you think. And they'll come back and say, your message is amazing. They may still not think we have a chance to win, but that's just because they've been listening to the two-party system in Fox News and CNN for too long. But when you actually look at what campaign has the most hope, what campaign has the best vision, what campaign is actually dealing with the crises that we are facing, not only the pandemic, but also this race crisis that we're in right now with the murder of George Floyd by the Minneapolis Police Department a few months ago. And this racial debate is brought up. Our campaign is probably the best position to deal with these crises. And when people watch our content, listen to our live streams, watch our videos, they're like, this actually gives me hope. And so it's that type of stuff that makes me excited and gives me hope for the next 3 months. I can't guarantee we're going to break onto the national stage, but if we do, I think there's a very real chance we could surprise a lot of people in November. I'm not running a protest campaign. I'm not doing this just to make a statement. I truly believe I'm the best candidate to be president. I truly believe we have the best vision. And I truly believe that we can find a way to make our nation healthier by dealing with our foundational issues. And I am looking for every opportunity I can find to share that message with as many people as I can.
Where do you say most of your bases comes from? Is it like a variety of people? Is it people of color, working people?
I don't know as far as the ethnic groups, but a lot of our supporters are people from the margins. A lot of our supporters are people who are independents, are not a part of the two-party system, are just frustrated with our campaign or with politics as usual. We get a lot of $5, $10, $15, $20 donations, and then we get a few $1,000, $2,000, $2,500 donations, which really skews our numbers, right? When you have that few donations, a few $1,000 donations can really skew your numbers. So I think our average donation is about $45, which might be a bit more than other candidates. I think they may have more like $30 or $25 average. But we don't have near the numbers that they do. And what's been very exciting is in the past 2 months, I would say a third to maybe even a half of our donations have been coming from new donors. Our base really is marginalized people, women, people of color, African Americans, Native Americans, people who at some point in their life recognize at a very real level that we, the people, did not include them. Those people are a lot of our base. Also at our base is a lot of millennials and a lot of Gen Z. Both of those two demographics, and they're the largest demographic now. They outnumber boomers. And these two groups, millennials and Gen Z, are absolutely primed and ready for systemic change. Yeah. Right? Millennials have been screwed over by the system financially, and they're ready for systemic change. Gen Z knows they're getting screwed environmentally, and they're ready for systemic change. I would say millennials are much more passive aggressive. Gen Z is like, oh, hell no. Like, you're not going to do that to us, and they're much more taking initiative and, cleaning up islands, plastic islands in the Pacific, and, buying out tickets for the Trump rallies in Tulsa. They're very proactive in the stuff they're trying to do to make their voices heard. And we are very actively campaigning to both millennials and Gen Z, because while these other marginalized groups can give us some of the voice and even some of the publicity, it's Gen Z millennials that give us not only the numbers to actually get to the White House, but they actually give us the networking prowess to bypass mainstream media and actually get our message out to millions of people around the country.
Yeah. Have you pegged a VP, and can you tell us a little bit about the thought process that goes into that when you picked a VP, or if you haven't picked one yet?
Yeah, so we do have a VP. Her name is Sudanam Moyo Wasife Curry, and she is a Green Party candidate for president in 2016 and 2020. Sudanam, yes.
Oh, I know Sudanam. She's your VP?
Yeah, she's my VP, yes. We named her about 2.5 weeks ago.
I didn't know that.
And we're very excited about her. I met her for the first time last March at the third party debate in Chicago. And she was in a different session than me. They had 2 sessions of the debate, and she was in the first session, I was in the second. And I got to listen to her. And she, not only did I like the things she was discussing, but she actually understood the doctrine of discovery very well.
Yes.
And I was actually quite impressed by the way that she handled herself and the way that she spoke. And so, but she was running for president in the Green Party, and she came in third in their nominating convention about a month ago. And so when our campaign began vetting and talking about who did we want to vet for our VPs and who were we looking at, I asked my staff to look at her and to look at her policies and to look at her interviews and what she had been doing. And they came back very excited about what they were seeing. And so I said, well, let's set up some interviews and let's talk with her. And so they got on the phone and they had conversation with her, and every one of my staff who talked with her just loved her, liked her energy, liked the stuff she was doing. So I had several interviews with her. And it was about 2.5, maybe 3 weeks ago, we asked her to be my VP. She was very excited to accept. We announced her at an online convention we had in the state of Washington about 2 weeks ago. And yeah, she is stepping into our system. She's getting involved with our campaign. She's bringing a lot of energy. We're doing kind of these weekly calls, almost 6 or 7 calls a week on different state campaigns where we're connecting with voters in states around the country. She's been joining me on those calls. She'll probably be on a live stream or 2 with me later this week, talking about things with our campaign. So yeah, I'm very excited to have Sudanam on our ticket, and I'm very excited about this, and she's been a great addition to our ticket.
Yeah, I know. We followed all the Green Party process, if whatever you want to call that, this whole thing. And, she didn't speak at the convention. I don't know if she was just like wiping her hands in the situation and moving on. But I'm glad to see that she's your VP pick, and that's going to be pretty exciting. So, we'll have to get her on the show and talk to her.
Oh, yeah, she would love to come and talk with you, especially if you're familiar with her campaign. She ran in 2016 and in 2020, so she brings that experience as well as just, she's very aware of the doctrine of discovery, which was very important for me because it's such a central part of my campaign. I wanted to have a VP who understood those issues, so it wouldn't be that much of a learning curve for them. And so because she was so well versed in that, I was very excited to interview her for our VP.
Well, we have a couple super chats just thanking you, Mark. Somebody, DC, thank you for the super chat contribution, says thanks from Mark Charles. He was a great guest, and I'm glad he came on with us today. And then another super chat contribution I saw from Anahawk. But the progressive left tends to be reactionary to serious Godspeak. In other words, too religious. Question mark. Did I read that right?
I don't know if you did.
But can you read that? I guess they're saying what the progressive tends to be too reactionary to serious Godspeak and too religious.
Or too anti-religious?
Maybe, I don't know.
Oh.
I don't know what the
I'm not sure if we understand the question.
Sorry. I don't have a question for you there, but thank you for the super chat contribution. And
thank you for coming. And thank you for coming on and talking about this. A lot of people don't view things in this way. It's definitely a different perspective to look at the foundations of our system and realize that they're, if we keep building upon something that's cracked, it's just all going to fall apart anyway.
Yeah.
So. And
we have a lot more to talk to. I want to have you back on. We didn't even talk about the white fragility kind of stuff because I think that was amazing. No, because a lot of people, I guess being the white male in the group sometimes, when I hear some of my friends, the way they kind of talk to, white people trying to convince them about the systemic racism within our society, it sometimes can be a turnoff. But the way you approach it, you almost approach it like you say that white people are also victims of trauma.
Not victims. I say white people experience trauma. So, and very briefly, the way I phrase it is, if you look at historical trauma, which I would identify as a multi-generational communal manifestation of a complex PTSD, and then you see similar symptoms in white people. So if you have people of color suffering from historical trauma, but you see similar symptoms in white people, and there's a researcher, her name is Rachel McNair, and she wrote a book called PITS, Perpetration-Induced Traumatic Stress, which she identifies as like PTSD, except if PTSD afflicts the victims of a horrifying event, PITS afflicts the perpetrator.
Yes.
So I identify what I would call the trauma of white America, which I would theorize is a multi-generational communal manifestation of a complex perpetration-induced traumatic stress. And so rather than treating white people as racist or as fragile, I instead treat white people as traumatized. Not victims of trauma, but they experience and respond to the history through a perpetration-induced traumatic stress. And so by having that lens on it, it actually gives me a lot of tools then to handle their triggers and the way they may enact outbursts around racial dialogues to try to disrupt the conversation. So in my book, I have 2 whole chapters on trauma, specifically dealing with this understanding of a perpetration-induced traumatic stress.
Yeah. We got a lot more things to talk about. You're so nuanced, Mark. Thank you so much for coming on. Everybody, go and help Mark Charles out if you can. Can you tell us where to go? I think you've already said it, but just to make sure.
Yeah, if you go to our website, markcharles2020.com, and you can make a donation there. You can sign up to be an elector there. You can be a volunteer there. You can get our newsletters there. You can link to our social media. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. We're on YouTube. We're even on TikTok. And I think I'm the only candidate, or one of the few candidates who's actually on TikTok. Trump may be trying to ban it, but we're using it to reach out to millennials and Gen Z. And so, people can follow us on social media. They can get engaged with us. And if you're able to, we would love your donations. We're not investing in much ad buying, but we are investing in content creation and in staffing so that we can work best with our volunteers and get our message out as effectively as we can on social media, so we can hit as broad of an audience as we possibly can.
Jonny, anything else? Mark, you were an amazing guest. Good luck. Please come back on soon. Tell Sad and Om to hit us up. We'd love to have her on.
Yep.
For Pasta Jardula,
Fiorella,
Jonny Sue on the ones and twos with Mark Charles running for president. Go see his website.
Convo out.